To India and Ireland, round Africa and back again. We don't really need to know just where we'll go. Maybe Canada, then to Brazil, then through the Alpine foothills. All I really want to know is, can we go? Oh baby, can we go? Round and around the globe.
Welcome to Take Me With You, episode 78. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Cheryl. We are two well-traveled people who want to go everywhere.
But that's not going to happen. So instead, we'll travel vicariously by inviting a guest to share their unique travel stories with us.
Today, we're talking to Emma. Emma is a theater artist and teacher living in Washington Heights, New York. New York. Welcome, Emma.
Welcome.
Hello, friends.
Hello, friend. Oh, I love whenever we have our old friends on this podcast and we get to say hi to them, especially right now during quarantine times. It's just so lovely to see your face.
It makes me so happy because other than my roommate, you're the first two people I've talked to today.
Oh,
geez.
goodness gracious.
Oh, wow. Well, and you're in New York, where it's
I'm in New York.
Serious.
New York. I live in Manhattan, uptown. Not taking the subways, not getting out. I'm in my neighborhood a lot these days, which I love because I love my neighborhood. But yeah, I'm in Manhattan, New York.
Wow. Are the subways still running?
They are still running.
Why?
Why is a good question. And I have that question too. People wouldn't be able to get there to work. Fortunately, I don't have to leave my apartment. But a lot of the essential workers still need to get to their places of business. And no one has cars if you aren't extremely wealthy. So, it's still going on. They're washing the subways twice a day, or so they tell us.
Wow.
So that's a unique experience of living in New York, is sometimes, even not during this time period of life, can see lovely MTA workers power washing the subway, and it is a beautiful sight.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy.
Just for the record, so that people are aware, just because things are often delayed when we release things. So we are recording on March 30th. So we're kind of in the middle of lockdown for COVID-19 and things like that. And I don't know when exactly this episode comes out, but we'll probably still be in lockdown when this episode comes out.
I think we will. We could say we're in lockdown round 1, maybe. I mean, I don't know if it's really round 1.
Yeah.
There have been a few rounds of canceling the world, but this is the no, seriously, stay home.
Yeah.
Except for if you're going on a walk or an essential worker or going to the store. So that's what we have at this point.
What's interesting is in New York, so the stay-at-home issue was recent, like a week or so ago. And I've been self-isolating with my roommate for around 2.5 weeks now.
Okay.
Just because that's how things got canceled. So I've gone on 3 or 4 walks in this time to try and get outside, or I go to the grocery store, try to stock up. And one of my walks is down. There's a beautiful riverside park that is on the west side of Manhattan that has running trails and is gorgeous this time of year. And on my way walking towards it, in a morbid sense of humor, is this big, beautiful, but sort of morbid cemetery that you have to walk by to get to the river. And I was walking the other day, and it seemed everyone had the same idea to get out because it was beautiful. And it was this weird game of Frogger to stay 6 feet away from everyone and try and walk down by the river. But that part of my neighborhood is lovely. And I enjoy the small amounts of time I get outside now. And I'm happy to talk about and stay strong with all of the other people who live in New York and really, really love this town for all of its really big flaws and wonderful things.
That's
I think
nice.
though that's why they closed state parks, at least in Washington. I'm not sure about other states and things like that. Is because everyone had the same idea, and then all of a sudden it became overcrowded in other areas.
Yeah, I definitely here it was originally just like social distancing, schools closed, a lot of the tech companies in the Seattle area closed. So a lot of people were already, working from home, but it wasn't a mandated stay at home thing. And then we had what I like to call our false spring that we get every year in the Seattle area, where we get it's a week, maybe a little less than a week, where it gets sunny and the weather warms up and it's like, oh, look, it's going to be spring and our spring is going to be beautiful. And it's not ever, because then of course today it like has rained and I think I got a little bit of sleet today and things like that. But so people were out all weekend, and I saw some pictures from Alki Beach, and there was no social distancing going on. And so then the governor's like, yeah, so that's not going to work, guys. Y'all got to stay home now. So, that going out is important, but it's good to hear, Emma, that at least what you're seeing in New York is that people are going out, but they are maintaining the appropriate distance. So that's good.
Yeah.
Our local grocery store did a really good job. I think they've all provided their workers with masks and gloves and stationed out the 6 feet distances and everything, which is a huge thing, especially in this neighborhood, because people don't have that big of an apartment necessarily. I'm thankful that I have at least a little bit of space, but so people hang out on the street. That's kind of what you do in this neighborhood. And so it's a little difficult, especially for younger people and older people who use that time to socialize in this neighborhood specifically, to not be on the street and not be on the stoop. But I think people are now starting to get a hang of it. And especially with schools being closed and everything, really like respecting each other's neighborhood space and starting to really to do their best to keep everyone safe and healthy.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's turn the focus of the conversation a little bit here, because I don't think we want this to be a COVID-19 podcast.
Let's pretend we were in a simpler time. Actually, no, this is the simpler time. Let's pretend we were in a complicated time where all of us had calendars that had things on them, and there were shows and there were dinners with friends. Let's pretend it's that time.
I'm hearing a little bit of loss there, Cheryl.
Yes.
So Emma, just to kind of start out, we have a set of questions that we like to ask all of our guests about travel. So I'll ask you a couple of those, and then you can tell us a little bit about what it's like to live in New York. So first of all, why do you travel?
I travel because I love seeing new things. I love the experience of figuring out a situation. I think when I've traveled abroad or to parts of the country, even the US, where I'm not an insider, I think it's really exciting for me, especially as a little bit of an introvert, but like walking the line of introvert extrovert to figure out the cultural situation of any place or any sort of museum or like what are you supposed to do in a restaurant where you don't know what to order. And that's a little exciting. And I also love to travel just for people. I love seeing people. I have friends who live in a lot of different places because we have this wonderful thing called the internet. And so I love that feeling of traveling somewhere and then getting to see someone who you've not seen in a long time, or maybe even met in passing, but get to see their face again. I've had a lot of fortunate run-ins where friends have been passing ships in the night, sort of traveling to different places and able to meet up for just that one coffee or that one dinner, and that's super exhilarating. And so, yeah, those are some reasons I travel.
Those are good reasons. I think we'll approve of those reasons.
Yes.
They make me happy.
Definitely. What type of traveler are you?
I like to travel light. Last time over the holidays, actually, I spent 2 months bouncing around the country a little bit because of some of my work and some of my family obligations / desires. I ended up, my mom gave me her old Osprey backpack. That was lovely. And I just, put all the essentials, my bulky sweaters, my black jeans, my practical shoes, and had spent about 2 months just living out of this backpack. With bringing my instrument. I'm a violinist also, so bringing my instrument with me too, which travels in a carbon fiber case, so it can't get hurt. But I was able to, go to upstate New York and go to this amazing artist retreat. I was able to be in New York for a little bit, couch surfing. I was able to be on the West Coast also, and not be hindered by a lot of stuff. So I'm really thankful that I can be that kind of traveler. I have short hair. I can figure out how to be fashionable without a big color palette, and warm. And basically, if I need to travel with an instrument, my instrument is not a cello. So that is great.
I guess, yes, of the stringed instruments, a cello would be much more difficult to travel with.
Yes,
That's
guitars
true.
are tricky too. So I'm glad it's a little small.
So I have to ask though, so as you're describing your traveling, I get this image in my head. Did you do any street performances?
I have done street performing before, and that's definitely a thing that's happened to me during traveling, is spontaneous street performance.
Yeah, girl.
Which is awesome because the New York street performing laws, if you're not amplified and you're not in a public park, if you're like on the street or in the subway and not blocking traffic, you don't need a permit. So you can just go whenever. And if you're asked to move, you have to move, but you don't get fined or anything. It's free. And also an interesting story about that. A couple years ago, I went on a wonderful trip to Europe with my mom right before I went off to college, or my first year of college. And I didn't have my instrument with me. I was really missing it. And we're walking through trying to figure out our train situation in the main train terminal in Amsterdam. And there was one of those pianos in the corner that like people set up and play, and like just a public piano. So there's always someone playing. There was someone playing, and there was a violin sitting on top of the piano. And I asked the person whose it was, I suppose, if I could play it, and they barely spoke English. And we ended up jamming for like 30 minutes, and it was great.
Oh, how
I didn't make any money,
cool.
but it was great. It was really great.
That's magical.
Yeah.
Aw.
Music is really a great way to find, to connect with people who you don't necessarily speak their language or know their culture. If you can like jam with them, then you're friends. It's great.
Yeah. Well, because I guess,
That's so cute.
Music is its own language in that sense. And so, I've heard a number of stories of people who, because English tends to be a fairly common language that's spoken around the world, not the entire world, obviously, not everybody knows it, but it often is that kind of connecting language where two people may not speak each other's native languages, but they might both speak English. So they may be able to communicate that way. And it sounds like music could be that same sort of a bridge language. You may not speak each other's language, but if you both understand music, it's a way to connect and a way to communicate.
Yeah, and it's also a shared activity. Like it just like cooking, I think also. I think about the wonderful cooking series, Salt, Acid, Fat, Heat, whatever that series is. And the woman, the journalist who cooks and travels in that show, she speaks a lot of languages, but often she doesn't communicate fluently with the person she's cooking with. the native speaker, but she gets to, manipulate the ingredient. It's the same sort of, I think, activity that is like fun to do together. You're making something together, and it creates a sort of memory, bond between people who don't necessarily know each other. Which I really love.
Lovely.
It's really lovely.
Oh, that's so great. How fun. Before we move on to the next question, I want to ask with this whole packing light for an extended period of time, because this is like, my heart is so happy with this right now. That's why
I knew it would be, Cheryl. I knew it would be.
Especially when you get the luxury of staying in people's homes, because then like laundry isn't even a big deal, and like if you don't need a towel, or, you know what I mean? Like people have stuff you can borrow if you forget something. So what was something that you found very essential that you packed other than your violin? And what was something that you wished you had packed?
Good question. I found essential for that time period. Well, I suppose this is two ways. The thing I didn't pack turned out to be essential, and I got it. But the thing I cherished that I loved was these pair of, they're my favorite pants. They're Everlane. They're Everlane black jeans. I wore them all the time, and they're very washable, and they don't stain, and they're very comfortable, and they're warm. It was very great that I had them. And I could wear them all the time. So they didn't take up a lot of room. I think just like a good, staple, comfortable item of clothing makes your life so much easier, because I could wear a sweater or a t-shirt or a blouse, and I still felt comfortable in who, clothes make you feel like you're like you're yourself, and you're comfortable and confident. And I think finding that like one item of clothing that you can take with you that makes you feel that way is essential, because you don't feel awkward. The thing I wish I packed, because I was traveling over the holidays, was a holiday outfit, for like more party outfit. Because I knew I was going to like 2 or 3 different events. And some of them were New Year's themed, and some of them were Christmas themed, and some of them were a little bit before Christmas. And one of them, I think, was your wedding, Cheryl.
One of them was my wedding.
Yes. And
Which
so
was Christmas themed.
ended up,
so here we go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I ended up finding a green dress that was pretty, utilitarian, warm, but cute at the same time. But it took a long time to find. And I don't necessarily love shopping all the time. So that was one thing that I wish I'd started my trip off with a staple dress, and instead of having to find one and then find space in my backpack for it halfway along the journey. But it ended up being fine, and I wore it to a wonderful, Christmas party in Jersey that I go to every year, and I wore it to your wedding, and I wore it to, I think, a Christmas Eve service. So it got some use. It got some use.
Nice.
So note to self, I need to make sure I get myself a really good utilitarian dress before my next trip. Got it.
For holidays. Holiday dress, yes.
It's very, comfortable.
Yep.
It's important.
Yep. Okay.
I mean, I think that is a really good thing to consider is on this trip I'm going on, is there anything special where I have to be dressed in a particular way? Because I think for the most part, I love what you're saying about packing is like, wear your tried and true stuff. Wear stuff that you know you love to wear, because there are so many areas that are new and uncomfortable sometimes, or stretching when it comes to travel. And I don't think what you're wearing should be a piece of that. I think, and like you're saying, even about feeling yourself, I think there's something to be said for that. So then, but then also, is there something particular where it actually does matter what you wear? Whether it's like, it's the summer, but you're going to go in a lot of churches in Europe, so you need to cover your shoulders, or like there's a nice dinner and you really want to go to this fancy restaurant and you need to be dressed appropriately for that fancy restaurant, whatever the thing is. So that's a good thing to think
and
about.
making yourself feel comfortable around the people you're going to be around. So if you know the people you're going to be around would appreciate if, like in Italy during the summer that you cover your shoulders, like make yourself and them feel comfortable with what you're wearing if you can. If that helps you move through the world in a good way, even if that's like having a blazer or having a pair of dress shoes that can be switched out. I think it can help like present yourself in new ways too, while being comfortable in yourself. Which I think is the challenge of travel too, because you don't know who you are going to be in new spaces, because people are always changing and acting in different ways in different situations. And if you have no idea what the situation you're walking into, that's really hard. So it's like finding that balance is important, I think, about considering what you're going to bring with you.
Yeah. Or underpack and bring some money and buy some clothes when you're there. That would be another way to go.
Unless you're like me and maybe Emma and you hate shopping. Yep. Okay, final question, and then you can tell us a little bit about your travel experience. What is your number one travel tip?
My number one travel tip. That would be number one travel tip is always make sure you know where your passport is. And as I'm saying that, I don't know where my passport is. I know it's in my apartment somewhere.
What?
Emma.
Oh boy.
Always know where your passport is and always know its expiration date, because those things are more important than you think they're going to be. And a couple years ago, I traveled to Mexico with a friend over the holidays, and I realized that my passport wasn't going to be expired, and I had to go to the New York expedited passport, like DMV, basically, which was an experience in of itself. And the people there were lovely. There were a lot of families who really everyone there was stressed because everyone's travel plans were about to be screwed. But got it figured out, but always know where your passport is and always know the expiration date for someone like me who sometimes just leaves things in weird places in their apartment. It's somewhere. I know it's somewhere.
That's good advice.
Yep. That is very practical advice. Because even if you're traveling domestically within the US, there are, depending on what state you're in, well, regardless of what state you're in, starting in October of this year, unless they roll it back because of all of the, COVID-19 stuff, but they're going to be requiring more stringent identification for airline travel. And some states like us in Washington, our regular driver's license is not sufficient. It will no longer be sufficient.
True.
But a passport will be. And I think Washington is going to be upping whatever it is that they're supposed to have on the driver's license eventually. But like for me, my driver's license doesn't expire for at least 2 years. I think it's more like 3 or 4 before it expires and I have to renew it. And so, but I have a passport. So I will just bring the passport. Yeah. It's easier than trying to go into the DOL and stand in those lines and get your picture taken and do all that stuff. So that's actually really useful, even if you're not necessarily traveling abroad.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I know New York State it has enacted the like quote unquote real ID laws. Because I had to update my passport or my driver's license rather to New York State driver's license recently, and they were like, do you want this option? I was like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a thing to consider. To have a backup identification also is important.
Yeah, that's true. I had great timing with changing my last name because it was like, great, I'll just take the enhanced driver's license. Then I don't have to deal with that later on this year. So it worked out pretty good.
So Washington is already issuing them.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so people can just go say, I want to get the enhanced driver's license, and it'll happen. Yeah.
Perfect. Or you
Yep,
can just
yep.
be like me and be lazy and wait and just use your passport.
Well, it's also not laziness if you've been diligent about making sure that you still have the right identification. So,
I suppose that's true. And not wanting to go to the Department of Licensing. I mean, can you blame me for not wanting to go to the DOL?
I mean, that was one of the most New York experiences I've ever had, is going to the DMV in 32nd Street DMV. It took like 5 hours and felt like I was in an episode of Broad City.
Wow.
So what makes that, because this is perfect, because you're telling us what it's like to live in New York. So that's what you're telling us about today. So we might as well start here. This is great. Just like what makes that, so because I've never been to New York City. I've never been to New York State. Did I stop in an airport once? I might have been in an airport once, but I definitely haven't like been there. Like I didn't leave the plane or the airport or whatever. So I haven't really been there. So when you say that was a real New York experience, what does that mean? What does that look like? What makes it feel very New York?
For me, it was, I suppose it's a sense, and this is completely almost not completely dissipated, but the energy of the city is always up. And for me, I work on a lot of different projects and a lot of different jobs, and I schedule my schedule very particularly, and I'm hopping around the city on the subway a lot. So it was in between 2 appointments I had on my calendar. I like taught an early class and then I taught a late class, and I was like, I'm going to go to the DMV today. I'm going to get my license renewed. And I go in and it's just packed. It's just packed with all sorts of people. And leading up to there, you take the train to 34th Street there, and it's just every train from everywhere coming in and out of Penn Station. There's just people. And that's not the experience of every place in New York. Like my neighborhood's not like that. Places where people residentially live aren't like that, but it is a place where a hub of the city. And so happened to be the nearest DMV that I thought I had a chance of going to. And I go up the steps and I take my number and I sit there and I sit there and I sit there and I wait and I wait and I wait. And people are just grumpy and doing their thing. But everyone's just there for the same reason. And it's just like a very driven energy. Also didn't hurt that in my mind I was flashing a TV show that I think really represents in some ways a lot of youngish women's experience in New York is Broad City. And I think they had an episode about the DMV, and I was like, oh, like now I'm having that same experience that's already been told to me as a New York experience. I think a lot of the New York experience is just there's so much media about New York that you get this sort of feedback loop of, oh, that's a New York experience because I've already seen it as an experience that people in New York have. Because there's so much storytelling and so many TV shows and movies that are based here, that things are always happening in those narratives. And so you always assume that things are always happening around you in New York. And for the most part, that's true. I think it's definitely blown up into a narrative idea of the city, but it's also just true.
Yeah, it was so interesting. I visited you. How long ago was that? Like 2 years ago. Yeah. And I was living in the mountains at the time and came to visit you in New York City. And it was just so different. It was hilarious because like I had been there for 24 hours in 8th grade on a like East Coast D Street 8th grade trip. So like a tiny snippet of it. But it was interesting staying there for several days with you, and had already lived there for a few years. And so it was interesting, like kind of seeing like, okay, what is Emma's just life like here? And we stayed up so much later than I normally stay up, but also you were a college student. So I think there's a piece of being a college student and a piece of it being New York that like together made a very different schedule. But like, it was so interesting, just the busyness, and it was like being at Disneyland or something like that. It was just everything was bustling always. And yeah, it was so different than my little mountain cabin life.
Yeah, I think it's also, I mean, part of it I think also is me being a young person, but I think that everyone hustles in New York. Everyone does what they can to, it's an expensive city, and does what they can to do what they need to do for financial reasons and to make themselves happy and to be able to continue going. And so like that, I think is just this, it's a ball of energy that just keeps feeding on itself. And the thing that makes it a livable city is your support networks and your place, figuring out if you can make a place here, which is difficult to do. And I'm really fortunate. I have friends and people around me to support me, and a place I really love to live. But getting there is hard for transplants, and people who've been here for a long time, it's hard to maintain that necessarily. Wow. Sometimes. And so like people who are true New Yorkers, like I don't call myself a New Yorker at all, even though I've lived here for the most time I've lived anywhere, which is wild to say. But I'm definitely not a New Yorker, because that is a respectful term I have for people who've lived here for a long time, and have gone through the city through a lot, because everything's a lot in New York. So those people, I think, really just like keep the city alive, and they're doing their thing, and they're different than us transplants. But we're all working in it together somehow.
So you said that this is the place you've lived the longest. Can you give us just sort of a brief overview of the different places you've lived in your life, and kind of about how long you were there?
Yeah, I've lived a lot of places in my life. My parents loved to move me around as a kid, which is great. I actually really enjoyed that. I'm not being sarcastic at all. I've lived in, and this is a little bit of a puzzle, every state that touches Ohio, including Ohio, except for West Virginia. I've lived on the...
What a way to describe it.
I'm trying to see if I can guess any of them.
Oh, I have no idea. I do not know the geography of that part of the country.
I forget how far over Ohio is. I think that's what's tripping me up right now, too.
Yeah, and several places in Ohio also. And I've lived on the West Coast, obviously, in various towns in and around the Seattle area. And then for school, I decided to go to my undergrad in New York at Fordham University, at their Lincoln Center location. So I have been here for around five and a half years now. I think that's, if I'm doing math correctly, because I completed my undergrad here, and now I am living in the city post-grad, which is great. And I think that this is, for now, as a 20-something, this is the place I call home, and I really love it. Stick it out here for a little bit. It's a little rough right now, but that's okay. And I'm the other place I've lived for about that long is Ohio, and that was when I was pretty young. So it's a different experience, and I think it's the first place I'm really making it. My parents have never lived in New York City, and so my family's never lived here. They've never really lived on the East Coast, and so it's just a different way of life and a different experience than I think that they've they've had. So I think I'm making my own in some ways, which is exciting and scary.
Aww.
And happy.
Yeah. So when you, like your first month, a couple months there, you're a freshman in college and you're in New York City proper, like amidst everything. What were some pieces of culture shock that you went through?
Pieces of culture shock. Well, there's just the general, I'm a freshman in college and I don't know what I'm doing culture shock, but that's different than New York culture shock. I think one of the exciting pieces of culture shock I had was I moved here in August, and August and late August is a lot of times part of New York City is doing a lot of public arts initiatives. A lot of times kids aren't back in school yet, and there's just a lot of people who are returning to the city or who don't go out of the city for the summer, who have access to free programming. So my first couple weeks in school, and being around Lincoln Center, which is where the opera is and where the Philharmonic is, and being a student also, I got to experience a lot of arts and culture that I'd never experienced before, which sort of, in a weird way, shrunk my world. For example, I was fortunate enough to see a wonderful initiative done by the Public Theater in New York called The Odyssey. It was their public works production. And all free tickets, by the way. It's a wonderful theater in the center of Central Park. Beautiful, and huge amphitheater. It's called the Delacorte, and was lucky enough to get tickets with a friend that I just made, that week. And I go in and I rush in and I'm rushing around and I'm trying to find my seat. And it's all free tickets, but it's also people who work for the theater and work in the theater. And it was right around the time where Hamilton was still is a big thing, but it was right around the time Hamilton was like gaining momentum. And who do I literally run into? But I smack my face literally into Lin-Manuel Miranda in line.
Oh no.
Yeah, like I literally physically ran into him.
Culture shock for you.
And I went, hi. Hi, Miss Miranda. And then just walked away and just like found my seat. And I was like, oh, so the people I know and love who make art I know and love are just, in New York, they're just around. They're just there. It's a city that is like geographically kind of small. And that's not the first, like, since then I've run into him several times, like just around.
Oh my gosh.
Which is like,
that's crazy.
It's just not a big thing. And also, since I'm working in the arts now, these people are technically my co-workers or my whatever fellow artists. So I don't know.
In the same industry, in the same city.
In the industry. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
No. But it was just like this weird, in addition to it being a beautiful and magical experience to see this wonderful public works that was like utilizing different organizations throughout the city, different cultural inputs from different boroughs, dancing from a bunch of different cultures, and youth choirs and things like that were all integrated into this big pageant performance of the Odyssey. But it was like among people in theater I knew were awesome and I looked up to.
Wow.
And that was free and accessible to me in some ways as a student. It's still, theater is a very expensive habit to have as a person who as an artist or as a person in the world. But it's also very rewarding. And I think, New York kind of shrunk my world in that way of being like, no, you're going to learn, you're going to do your thing, you're going to make make stuff happen. You're going to make friends, and don't freak out about people because just they're around now. They're around. So that was a big moment. And there's a lot of good food. So that's good too.
Oh my gosh. I'm trying to figure out if this is more of a culture shock moment or more of like a TV show moment that you move to New York and then like run into Lin-Manuel Miranda. Like maybe feels more like an episode of Broad City or something like that. Or no, something a little more hopeful than Broad City is actually, but
yeah, I mean,
so
like
cute.
my life is, you know, that's a very, if blown out of proportion in the way like Portlandia is blown out of proportion of Portland, outlandish version of New York, but it has some essential truths to it. Also, I feel like I have a thing for running into celebrities because I literally have smacked into also Robert Pattinson once at a restaurant I worked at for a little bit. I literally face planted into him coming around a corner. Not my proudest moment.
Okay, Emma, so I had the lovely pleasure of getting to visit you in New York, but for our listeners who maybe won't be able to go sleep on your floor in New York, it's okay. She gave me a mattress. It was actually lovely. But what would you recommend for somebody visiting to, like, what are the touristy highlights that you're like, yeah, go do that touristy thing? And then what are the things that you're like, skip it? And then what are the off the beaten path things that are worth doing? All those
For
things.
example, someone like me who's literally never been there.
Yeah.
Great. Yes. Highly recommend, first off, highly recommend if you want to go spend time in New York, ask your friends who live in New York if they have couches, if you want to sleep on their floor. Sometimes they will allow it. Sometimes they'll be like, no, get a hotel room. But ask that. I've done my fair amount of couch surfing, and it can work if you are up for that kind of thing. I think touristy things, I think my main thing is if you're going to be here for like a week or a couple of days, definitely, and you are able-bodied and can go up and down stairs, you definitely buy a Metro Pass, MTA pass that's unlimited. So don't load up your card with money. Buy a week pass. It's like $33. It will pay for itself for the fare, and just pick some places that you want to go and explore. And just, if it's nice out, and I highly recommend coming to New York in the fall when it's beautiful and sunny and trees are just gorgeous. Just pick a restaurant or pick an area. Like, if you want to go down to Wall Street, like, just go down there and wander around. And you know, we have these wonderful computers in our pockets. Look up things around you if they're interesting to look at, and be open to where the city will take you. You know, go to Washington Square Park and then, you know, listen to the street musicians and buy some falafel for $4. And also, you know, I would recommend, if you want to see a Broadway play or musical, definitely support them. They need your money too, and it's great and it's beautiful.
And it's Broadway.
Love Broadway. See
Tell
those
us
things.
your Broadway hacks.
Amazing.
Yes.
See those things you've been really wanting to see, but also I would say if you have time and you have money, go downtown and see a concert at Joe's Pub, which is the Public Theater of New York. They have just wonderful musicians and shows there. See something in Brooklyn at St. Anne's, or down the way at Signature Theater. Or the Flea, which is all the way down in around Wall Street, downtown. If you want to see something interesting and weird and up and coming, even New York Theater Workshop, also down like in East Village. Venture out if you want to see theater downtown and explore those neighborhoods as well, because it's in a much more intimate setting. it's cheaper, most likely. And also, as someone who lives in New York, those are where the most interesting and most innovative stuff is happening that often comes to Broadway and then often makes it big. So it's
when you say interesting and innovative, so when I think of Broadway type theater, not necessarily Broadway official, but just like theater, interesting, unique, I think of like weird, bizarre, like off the walls, bonkers stuff. Is that what you mean?
It can be, but it can also be like Hamilton was innovative and interesting in its own way and started in workshops down at the Public Theater.
Okay.
So Hadestown started at New York Theater Workshop, and there's a variety of all sorts of types. And I guess what I'm saying is, let the city, if you are interested in something or like want to see a musician or a type of music that you are interested in, or want to just hear a good story, look at reviews in New York coming up and say, oh, what's interesting on Broadway, but what's interesting happening around town. And the amazing thing is the density of New York. There's so much going on at all times. So you can find something that is maybe new to you, but also piques your interest, that maybe has a strong story that you love, or really interesting and beautiful music. My other thing is, that is a must do, is I think try and, at least for one day, get out of Manhattan proper and go either to Queens or Brooklyn, and pick a destination there, whether it's a good restaurant or go to Prospect Park, and or just the waterfront in Brooklyn, and just get out of Manhattan proper, Midtown. I think much of people's perception of New York is just those 40 blocks or whatever. But New York is so varied and different, and the neighborhoods are beautiful and have their own histories and their own experiences. And I think take that time to walk into different neighborhoods, not just maybe centrally located. And with an unlimited Metro card, you'll get anywhere. You can basically get anywhere in the city in about an hour-ish.
Okay.
Whenever I leave my apartment, which is in Washington Heights, I usually budget an hour to get anywhere, because either I'll be a little early or I'll be running a little bit, but I can get anywhere basically in an hour. I think also things that are not overrated are parks. Like, definitely spend some time in Central Park. You can.
Oh my gosh, Central Park was way bigger than I thought it was going to be.
It's huge. It is.
Oh my gosh.
And Prospect Park is 3-4, I don't know how many times bigger than it in Brooklyn. But the blessing that is Central Park to New York is just immense. And it's a public space where so much is happening so many times, like all the time. And you can take food there and picnic there. There are just like, if you go during the summer, spring, or fall, it's just it's one of my favorite places. You can walk around the reservoir there. There are Sheep's Meadow. There is just always bustling with people and just the happiest place to be. I'm really missing it now in the springtime, because usually this is about the time when we start to plan picnics outside, because it's a public space, and we all are cooped up in our apartments. Living in New York, no one really has front yards or anything like that, and so the parks are just really, for the most part, really well maintained. The city has done a great job to make them public spaces and make them accessible in some ways, and can be just like the most beautiful places. And yeah, spend some time in the parks. If you're into museums, go check them out. I highly recommend MoMA PS1, which is a smaller offshoot of the Modern Museum of Art that usually has more interactive or event-based art. So they'll have showings with different artists who come up and do talks. They'll have music. They'll have different art book fairs, and their exhibits are a lot smaller, and it's donation based, I believe. So you can pay the suggested donation is $5, and it's in Queens, so it gets you a little bit out of Manhattan proper, and it's just on the E train, not too far. And it's very. They have an outdoor. They have lots of sculptural things, and it's not very big. They have a beautiful, beautiful. I don't know if you know James Turrell, the installation artist. He makes these beautiful pieces of. They're basically a room that you go into, and then there's a basically a window cut into the ceiling with no glass, and it frames the light in the room, and the wood in the room is sculpted in such a way that it basically looks like the sky is a painting. So you can go in there and just like sort of take a moment and breathe and meditate and watch the sky happen. So they have one of those there, which is a very beautiful place to be.
That's cool.
And very just like serene and lovely. So highly recommend it.
I love that.
Yeah. Also carry like $40 cash, because you're going to want to eat places and they're going to be cash only, and it's going to be frustrating. Or you're going to want to go to the deli and they don't take card. So just always carry
so that's pretty common in New York, is to just take cash.
For small meals, I'd say in a lot of places that are more mom and pop, if you'd say that they prefer cash only. So there's been times when I've really, really wanted falafel, but the falafel place cheap and amazing, but only takes cash. And I'm like,
okay.
I don't have cash.
See, that's a good tip, because I would have assumed that in New York, everybody takes a card.
I mean, I'd say the bigger businesses do, but I think for smaller businesses and for delis or bodegas, like small corner stores, that they're dealing a lot in small purchases. So they prefer that you use cash. And,
sure.
It's nice. For example, one of my New York experiences going to school at Fordham at Lincoln Center is I got to know my deli guys over at the deli across the street. And they mainly had a, card limit. And if I went in there with cash, they'd like front me for coffee for $1. So, it's that's kind of the feeling of being in that environment too. So, yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense.
That's cool. I want to ask you about what's overrated. And then also I want to ask you I want you to talk about what Trader Joe's is like in New York, because that was fascinating to me.
Well, that seems like a really weird question. Now I'm intrigued.
It's a very specific and very valid question. Overrated, I would say that going up in the like Empire State and Chrysler Building or Rockefeller Center, like those things I think are a little overrated, at least for me who lives in the city. I think the One World Trade Center tower was really magical to go up into. It costs a lot of money, but I think if you're going to do a touristy thing where you go to the top of a building, that one's, I think, really impactful and interesting. And also just the view from up there is just a really beautiful sight. If you love cityscapes, and New York's a really interesting cityscape. And I would say overrated things. I'd say any sort of like tour that's not like a food tour or like a historical tour is not, I don't know. I'm just not about them. And I think that you can see a lot more interesting things. And especially for me, who's skirting introvert extrovert control the environment you're in if you just pick a neighborhood and a couple things you want to do and go do it by yourself.
So what would be an example of a tour that isn't a historical tour or a food tour?
I don't know, like a See New York bus tour or a
I see.
any sort of those sorts of things, which are all over the place. And I think a lot of people who come here as tourists only experience New York through that lens, which is unfortunate.
Which, like, to be fair, we already get through TV shows and movies. Like, Ryan, you've probably seen a lot of New York, you know?
Way more in New York than I think I would maybe have liked to have seen.
So then you've probably already seen anything you'd see from a bus on a show, you know? And so
That's
then it's
true.
like, it's more about, I would think, experiencing it than,
Yeah, and the downside of a bus tour, just the advantage is you get to see a lot quickly. The downside is you see it from a bus.
Yeah.
Instead of being able to take the time to see it or walk around or experience or pause or ponder or any of those sorts of things.
And
All right,
also,
Emma, what about Times Square?
overrated. It's overrated. It's not my place. I go there when it's the place I think that a lot of the theater industry revolves around. So I go there for that and basically nothing else. If I have to take the subway out of 42nd Street. But it is very, it's a little slither of claustrophobia being inhaled into your lungs always.
I can see that. I mean, from what I've seen in TV and movies, it looks a little overwhelming. That being said, if you've never been there, are you saying it's not worth even just going even for like 5 minutes to see it? Or are you just saying it's just not it's not as amazing as it looks on TV and movies?
I would say it's really good at doing what it does. And so it's worth, I think, if you're going to New York, go to Times Square, but maybe have a destination. So maybe, go to, I don't know, have a destination that brings you through there so you're not stuck there. I think it's important to experience, I guess. But it loses its charm quickly.
I see.
So, okay, I think, Ryan, I would have you do what I did, which was I went to a Broadway show that was like down the block from where Times Square was. And so I was like, I need to see it. And I told Emma, I need to see it. And she's like, I mean, okay, like you can go see it, but it's not great. And I went there and it was way, way, way bigger than I pictured it being. I think about the spot where a lot of things are shot at, and it just looks like it's like one large intersection or something, but it's long and it's way more tourist than I wanted there to be there, which is, I mean, anything more than a couple, but still just like it was so obnoxious, and it just like the obnoxiousness even for me was just I walked around for a minute and I was like, I'm good. I can't even really get that great of a picture necessarily. You know what I mean? Like, because even getting a snippet of any of the pieces, like I wasn't getting any good pictures. And then I was like, I just don't want to be here now. And so I think it was like interesting to see, but I'm so happy I didn't take a train just to go see it.
I see.
Yeah.
And it's the center point of the city in some ways. So there's no really way to really avoid it if you're trying to get anywhere. Yeah, so basically every train goes through there. That's an exaggeration, but a lot of trains go through there. And, just multiply that feeling by the feeling of being August and summer and in business casual, and you're carrying a backpack full of contracts to a office building across Times Square, and it's just gross. There's people everywhere. And that's my experience of Times Square.
Oh, man. Anything else you want to share about New York before we move on, Emma?
I would say that I definitely come to New York, especially after all of this shenanigans in the world is over. Because I think New York is really good at what it does, and it's a big city with a lot of different cultures and people. And I didn't even get to talk about like Chinatown or Little Italy or any of the neighborhoods that have been places where people come and do what they do really well. People make really good food and really good art and live really good lives here. It can be hectic and wild. But I think if you are interested in coming to New York, don't let its New Yorkness scare you, because it's also just so big and so small. It's like the smallest, biggest town. Living here has been taught me a lot, and it's gotten to the point where I take a train and I reliably every week run into people I know.
Wow.
And I cross paths with people on different streets, and I'm not just in one neighborhood. I'm traversing the entire city for my work and teaching and everything. And the city flows in that way. And I think it's important if you want to come to New York to understand how that flow works and to experience it. And maybe it's not for you. Totally cool if it's not for you. But it does what it does really well. The city is always flowing and hanging on, I think, by this like weird magical tether of somehow the subways are never quite falling apart, but they're kind of falling apart. And people are
There's a glowing review.
Yeah. I mean, but they get, you without them, the city would be dead. And
yeah.
The people are always running slightly late and the coffee's always a little too hot. I don't know. There's a lot of metaphors in there. But it does what it does really well. And it's a really wild and unique place that I think is worth spending your time in, at least for a little bit.
This is the conversation that people had before writing NYC and Annie. I feel like everything you said was too loud, too tough, too
Exactly.
NYC, I'd go years without you, but I can't get enough. Ryan, do you know this song?
I don't. Is that in the stage show but not in the movie?
I don't know. I had it on a soundtrack, which is how I know it very well.
I think it might be, I don't know. I think it might be in the older movie. I'm not an expert on Annie.
Yeah, because my grandma had Annie, and we would watch it anytime we went to my grandma's house. And I don't remember, like, if you had sang the song like you just did, it sounds vaguely familiar, but I would not have been able to tell you it's from Annie. I've seen the stage show of Annie, and there's several things that are different from the movie. So I wonder if it's just in the stage show and not in the movie. And that's why maybe I don't recognize it. Or it could be completely wrong, and someone may be yelling at their audio playing device right now and telling me that I'm an idiot, in which case I apologize.
Oh, man. Well, Emma, thank you so much for sharing with us about your time living in New York. We have a couple follow-up questions for you. So our first question is based on the title of our podcast, Take Me With You. If you could take us with you to just one thing in New York, what would it be and why?
I would take you to, and I mentioned it several times, but the falafel place that is southwest of Washington Square Park, takes cash only, is the best. And I tell you this because I had a park meeting with a friend 2 summers ago, and he was like, we're going to this amazing falafel place. And it's right by NYU too, so there's just like a lot of small eating places around there. And when I tell you it was the best thing I've ever tasted on a hot summer's day with tahini, and it was just amazing, and it was really messy and only $4. And I would take you there because also I've walked across town just to go get falafel because I wanted $4 falafel. And it's so good. And it's so just precious to me. And I've worn my soles of my shoes down to the bone just to walk there. So, I would take you to get some falafel and hang out in the park and maybe get some, I don't know, softy ice cream too, soft serve. It would be good. It'd be good. It'd be nice and sunny and there'd be music. And then we walk somewhere interesting.
That sounds great.
Before Cheryl asks her next question, Cheryl, when you went, did Emma take you to the falafel place?
Nope. But it sounds like she hadn't been there when I visited her.
That is true.
Because I visited her 2.5 years ago.
Okay. All right, then.
I believe it was the summer after.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to let you off the hook. Also, I expect a love song to the falafels coming out from you shortly because the way you speak of them, it's like, I would walk across town for you, falafel. I would wear my shoes out for you, falafel. Emma, Ryan, as long as we're in this quarantine time, this question's going to be a little sad. So I'm interested to hear what the answer is, but then we might need to workshop an alternative question during this time when none of us really get to travel. Emma, what is your next trip?
What is my next trip? Well, hopefully.
And if you don't have a next trip, what do you wish your next trip could be? How does that fix it?
Great.
Okay.
Yeah. I think they're the same answer, and they're also a little bit sad because of quarantine. So I really want to go home and hug my mom. And I can't do that right now, which is okay because I'm doing the right thing. But also, like, the dogs that my parents have and all my friends on the West Coast. I'd love to do, like, a West Coast tour of love and friendship that includes, like, LA, Portland, maybe a friend vacation up to Vancouver. But definitely back to Seattle also because I'm missing the West Coast vibes in my life.
Yep. I do wonder once we've kind of been through the bulk of the effects of the coronavirus running through society and, quarantine and stay at home orders and all that stuff have all been lifted. I wonder how much of a surge we will see in travel, both just domestic and international. Like and by the time the world is through this, realistically at least 6 months probably before we're really to a place where people feel through it. Like really, and potentially longer than that. But even just, I think, getting through the bulk of the full lockdown, I wonder if people will have felt so isolated, kind of like you're describing there, Emma, because I'm sure you're not the only one. Well, I know you're not the only one who's, separated from family and, has just the physical separation. Even if we can connect digitally, it's still not quite the same as being able to connect in person. And so I wonder if there will be sort of a surge in people traveling and visiting and connecting in a physical way. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
Well, and all those canceled trips, I think there'll be a lot of people who will be trying to reschedule their canceled trips as well.
Yeah. Even just a reflection of that, the website that I used to plan my Disneyland trip that didn't go the way it was intended. It has, crowd predictors, how big the crowds are going to be. And I got an update this week. They have updated because I've been tracking additional dates in the future for my redo trip. And they said, I've got updates on all of these, on our predictions, and they all increased. I'm looking at the earliest I'm looking at is November, and I'm even looking out to next February. And they're like, yep, we think it's going to be busier. Cause like you said, people are going to they've had to cancel trips. They're, wanting to go do things. They're going to want to be out. So they're anticipating bigger crowds. We'll see if that ends up being that way, but
yeah.
I keep imagining the first, maybe in 2 or 3 or 4 months, whenever July rolls around or something, hopefully, fingers crossed, and good thoughts willing. People in New York finally being able to go out in the parks and to everything that they do outside during the summer. Because I'm just really looking forward also I guess it's a trip because I haven't been outside of my apartment in a while to go to Central Park and to have a picnic and or to go up, there's a park uptown also that's beautiful, to, have some time outside with friends and throw a Frisbee around and do those things.
Yeah.
Emma, do you have any travel questions for us?
I suppose, Cheryl and Ryan, if you were to, based on what I described, come to New York for a weekend, what would be the 4 things you would want to do?
Ooh.
Are you waiting for me, Cheryl?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I have to see a show. Like I cannot go to New York and not see a show. And whether it's, a Broadway show or one of the workshop type places that you described, I don't know that I have a strong feeling one way or the other. I see a lot of the touring Broadway shows already here in Seattle. It's not the same as, Broadway, but it's still high caliber. So it does not need to be a musical as far as I'm concerned. I love theater. So even just an actual, just theater production without music, I would be perfectly fine with too. So that's definitely a must. So that's one. I think I need to see Central Park. Because it sounds like there's a lot. And even I was looking kind of on Google Maps. It's like they have their own zoo.
Yeah, there's a Central Park Zoo.
Which is bizarre to me because to me zoos are very big and maybe it's a smaller zoo. I'm not sure, but it seems like there's a lot there.
Ryan. It's a big park.
It's a small zoo. And I didn't get to mention the Bronx Zoo, which is a beautiful place to go also. It's like the big zoo, which is north in the Bronx, which I've spent Easter at once, by the way, and it was lovely. But yes, Central Park Zoo.
So I think, I've got to see a show. I've got to go to Central Park. Oh gosh, of all the other things you described, I think I was just, I'm overwhelmed by New York, to be honest. And part of it is I don't truly have a good sense of where things are, and what things are what or whatever. Cause there's all Brooklyn, which is different, but it's still New York, or Queens, which is different, but it's still New York. I don't fully understand what those things mean. So I think I don't know if this is part of the same thing or not, but you said the One World Trade Center, right? Which is the new kind of replacement for the Twin Towers. But I've also heard previously about even just the 9/11 memorial, which I'm assuming is nearby.
Yes, It's at the base of it. Yeah.
Okay. So I think kind of all of that, I think, is something that I would want to see for sure, both going up to see the view that you described, but then also seeing the 9/11 memorial, I think. So I got 3 things. You asked for 4. I don't know. One of the, whatever the other park was, it started with a P that was down in
Prospect
Brooklyn.
Park. It's in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think maybe that I like the idea of parks. I like the idea of kind of seeing outside. And I noticed on Google Maps, there's a lot of botanical gardens, and I really enjoy walking through botanical gardens. So maybe there, I don't know.
There's a botanical garden in the Bronx that's actually close to Fordham University proper, which is up there as well, which is really beautiful. There are lots of good parks and gardens.
Perfect. Okay, Cheryl.
Okay, so this is going to be a combination of what we talked about and other things that I didn't get to do last time that I want to do at some point. I want to go to another show because shows. I got to go to 2 Broadway shows when I was there, and both of them we did discounted tickets. Emma went with me to one, and then I went solo to another one. Hey, going to a play, great solo activity. So that it worked out well. It was great. And Emma used some website that sells discounted Broadway tickets for
Today
us going to
Tix
Hello
is
Dolly.
amazing. Today Tix.
And so that was good. And then I went to the TKTS booth in Lincoln Center and did the like day of purchasing tickets thing. And that worked great too, because, well, and part of why it worked great is there were like almost everything on the board I would have been happy to get a ticket to. And so I just kind of I had time to stand in line and stare at that board. And so I had time to prioritize, okay, I think this one would be first, this one be, and so, but yeah, I would definitely want to go to another show or two. Maybe it's a weekend. Let's do 2 shows.
Yeah.
I would want to go back to Central Park as well. Man, it just like there was something so magical. I just love any park, but it's a great park. Yeah. And then I did not make it up to the Met Cloisters in Washington Heights. Oh, I guess that's past Washington Heights.
Yeah, it's more in what's it called? Inwood is the sort of the neighborhood above where I live, north of where I live. It's gorgeous. It's one of the, believe it's one of the highest points in the city. So you can see like Hudson Valley from there, and it's gorgeous.
I saw recommended on a couple lists, and we actually had a guest share about it as their Wish You Were Here a while ago. Brooke shared about it, but it's like an outdoor, but there's art there, right?
Yeah, it's they built the Met built on top of this sort of hill, naturally occurring hill in Inwood, a place for all of their medieval and sort of pieces of artifacts and churches that have been sort of reconstructed, monasteries and different pieces of medieval art that are built into this like stone cloister, basically, that they built so that they could build in these pieces of temples and churches and cathedrals. So you go there and it feels like you're walking through different churches in Europe and from all over, I think. It's really magical.
Yeah, I definitely want to go there. I didn't make it that far up north, and so it was just something where it was like, with everything else I packed in, it didn't work out in the trip, but I would definitely love to go there. And then I think I got to go to Brooklyn. Love Brooklyn. I would love to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. I think that would be my other thing I would love to do. Yep.
Do you approve, Emma?
I approve. I think they're very good plans.
Perfect. All right. So we're going to transition into the last segment of our podcast episode this week called Wish You Were Here. During this part, each of the three of us is going to highlight a travel attraction from one of the places that we have been in our many travels. And it'll just be a brief little snapshot of a cool thing that we have been to or experienced as we've kind of traveled around. And think of it kind of like a little postcard that says, hey, this was really cool. Wish you were here. So Emma, what would you like to do for your Wish You Were Here?
I would like to wish you were with me on a cross-country road trip, but we go through the Badlands. Because I've been thinking about, like, do I fly to the West Coast or drive to the West Coast the next time I get to go? I was like, I've been on a couple of cross-country road trips, and one of the most magical places and beautiful, the total opposite of New York, I think, would be the Badlands, in the middle of the country, north middle of the country. Believe it's in South Dakota. I could be wrong.
Yep, I just looked it up. Correct. It is South Dakota.
I am correct. Yay, my memory serves me. It was a few years ago that I was there, but it feels like you're in a sci-fi movie on Mars, and also feels like you're the most small thing ever. And it's kind of what I want right now, since I'm cooped up in my apartment. I just want to be in a big space where I feel like nature is just huge and encompassing and beautiful, and be there with some friends.
Wow. I just did a quick little Google because I've heard of the Badlands, but I don't know that I've ever actually seen a picture. That looks amazing.
It's incredible. And it's one of those places that I know feels like I know feels like it's super, I mean, everywhere on Earth is super old, but it feels old, and it feels like you can feel the sort of Americanness of it before America was like the native, you could feel and see sort of the native, both plants, animals, nature, and people imagine that happening in that space because it is so big and so just unlike any other sort of natural thing that I've been to. Feels like you're on a different planet.
That's
I've
super
seen
cool.
it on lists of, I've done a lot of looking at lists of like top, I don't know, nature things in the US that you should see, or national parks, or, you know, just like different lists of like, where should I go that's gorgeous in the US? And it keeps hitting those lists. And I have not looked into getting there yet. But
yeah, I think the biggest downside is that it's in South Dakota.
yeah.
I've been to South Dakota, not to the Badlands, but there's not a lot there.
Yeah. I think a road trip is the way to go. On the way.
Yeah, but exactly. It's got to be on your way somewhere else, because I don't know that as a, I mean, I'm sure
as
it's
a
really
destination.
cool, but there's a lot of nothing to get there. So awesome. That's a great wish you were here. Cheryl, what do you want to do for your wish you were here?
I would like to share about something local to us in Washington, Western Washington. And it is a place that I was actually really near this weekend, but did not go to because it is a restaurant and brewery. So didn't do that, but I was thinking about it because I like it a lot. It is called the Silver City Brewery. It's in Silverdale, Washington, which is kind of like the Hood Canal area, I believe. And I haven't spent much time in that area. I've spent more time like on Whidbey Island or the Olympic Peninsula or other places, but that little section is not quite as far of a drive necessarily from where we live in the Seattle area. And just gorgeous nature out there. I went out there on Saturday because my husband and I found a hike that was not a state park and no one was at. And so, and we didn't care if we went for a long drive. It was like, we're out of the house, so let's go for a long drive. Who cares if it takes a while, you know? And so that was really great. But yeah, but they have really great beers and great food, and Silverdale is a really cute little town, and it's on the water. We went there the day after we got engaged last year and went on a little drive over there and stuff. So I would say go check it out.
Nice.
Wish you were here. How about you, Ryan?
I'm also going to do something a little bit more local to the sort of greater Seattle area. And I think you and I are both just kind of thinking about like, hey, how can we get out? What are things that we might still be able to do? And so this is the Burt Gilman or the Sammamish River Trail. And it's not really a hiking trail. So for people who don't know, it's not kind of like it's not the place you would go hiking. It's paved most of the way, but it's actually this really long, I want to say it's something like 20 miles, 22 miles long, something like that. No, I don't remember. Someone also out there probably knows and is yelling the correct answer at me. And maybe Cheryl is checking on the computer right now. I'm not sure. But it's a really, really cool just walking and bike path that goes through Seattle and then up north around the north end of Lake Washington and all the way over to what we call the east side of Seattle, all the way down into Redmond, which it doesn't go to Microsoft, but that's the city that Microsoft is actually in. And it ends at a place called Marymore Park. And it's just a really beautiful kind of scenic way of kind of walking or biking through different parts of the greater Seattle area. And you don't have to do the whole thing from start to finish. There are lots of places where you can get on and off of the trail. And for part of it over here on the east side, it actually parallels the Sammamish Slough, which is kind of a river that feeds into Lake Washington. And so you kind of have sort of that kind of riverside with ducks and things like that. And it's just a really great way to kind of get out and to walk and to see just kind of what's around. And if you are in the mood for, going all the way into Seattle or vice versa, you can definitely do that. I might recommend doing that biking instead of walking, but maybe you're a biker or a walker or a runner, so maybe you could do that too. So it's just a really kind of fun way to kind of get around and see some things in the greater Seattle area that aren't necessarily walking on streets.
I love it. I've never actually gone on that trail.
At all? Any of it?
I don't think so.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I think back when I ran cross country when I was like in early high school, I ran part of that trail. I don't know. I can remember like that route sounds vaguely familiar.
It's just so surprising to me because it goes like right. It parallels with the. Oh no, I'm going to say the wrong direction. In my head, it's south, but now that I think about it, I don't think it actually is south. But part of UW, the campus on UW, it goes all the way up to Gasworks Park. Like it goes all the way around. That's so fun. I guess you lived in Bellevue, and so it doesn't really go through. It doesn't go all the way down to Bellevue. I guess I've lived in close proximity to it most of my life. So
Bellevue and Green Lake are the farthest north I've lived in the area. And so, yeah.
Well, it's super fun.
I should check it out.
You I mean, it's not close to you right now. Of course, you could drive to it.
I don't care. I'll drive there. It's all good.
I mean, you could totally drive to it because I've done that because part of it is within walking distance to where I live right now. And so at least once I walked down there and then walked that a little bit when we had some decent weather. And I just was like, I just need to, walk around. So,
yeah. So Ryan, how long did you think it was?
I thought it was like 20 in my head, the number, of course, and with our last episode that we recorded in my head, the number was way off. I was like half correct. So in my head, it was 22 miles, but I don't.
So according to the internet, it is 27 miles, or another website says 18.8, and another website says 27, and another website says over 20.
Well, I'm in the ballpark then.
Yes. So it is one of the great mysteries lost to time is how long is this trail?
Indeed. Well, I think
part
of it that's tricky is during sections of it, especially in Seattle, it kind of goes away and it's part of the road, but then it comes back. So I think that may be where some of the confusion comes in. And by the way, I also figured out
gracious way of viewing that. Ryan.
Thank you. I also figured out why the number in my head of the distance between Seattle and LA was wrong.
Okay.
Why? Because it was the number in my head was double what it should be because it's the number of miles when you fly from Seattle to LA, but it's round trip. That's why I had it wrong. So it made me feel a little bit better.
Listeners can go back and listen to the last episode.
Yep.
Where we talk with Christy about Central and South America and how wrong Ryan was at geography. So
no. How wrong Ryan was at distance, not geography. Come on now. And you didn't know either, to be fair.
I didn't know either. Oh my goodness. Emma, thank you for being on our podcast. We loved having you. Do you have anything that you would like to plug?
I do, and thank you for having me. I am an artist in New York, and artists in New York are having a little challenge right now because a lot of our things have gotten canceled because of COVID-19 and the precautions around that. So I would like to plug a great fund that's going around called trickleupnyc.org. It's a great place to donate. They're creating content every day with artists who are giving their time on their feed and on their website. People from Broadway, people from off Broadway, people all around who are great writers and singers. And they're giving money to grants and money to different artists who are in need right now in the New York area. So definitely check that out. I'm on social media at the Emlee, TheEmlea. And since this whole shenanigans is going down in the world, a lot of my artistic projects are going to be more accessible to people outside of New York. So if you follow me there, you can find updates about a production of As You Like It that we're bringing to a digital theater near you sometime in the future. And I will be facilitating music and sound things for that. And another project called the Decameron Digital, which we're exploring what it means to be together apart and tell stories with a bunch of wonderful creators and people from all over the world who are wanting to be together in this time of wildness in the world. So if you follow me on social media, I'll be posting about those, and generally just support those in your life who make good things, and be a good person.
Good life advice. Awesome. And then hopefully, Emma, you will share some pictures of your life in New York with us, and then we can post those on our social media site. We are at Timwy Podcast. That's TMWY for Take Me With You Podcast. And we are on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook.
I look forward to Emma's engagement photos with the falafel as well. That'll be really great.
I'll have to see if I have any falafel photos from a while back, because it'll be a moment before falafel and I can get together again.
I've heard about these long distance relationships right now, and I'm really hurting for you.
They can work.
You can also email us at timwypodcast@gmail.com. Send us your travel questions, send us your travel stories from a time when all of us just freely traveled across the globe, so carefree. And send us the story of the time when you literally ran into Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Since it's so common. You can also call us and leave us a voicemail. The phone number is 406-763-8699. Or if you prefer letters, 406 Pod Timwy. Please rate and review our podcast. We'd love it if you would subscribe to make sure that you are notified every time a new episode comes out. And we would love it if you would share about this episode on social media so other people can learn about what it is like to live in New York City.
As always, thank you to Beth Reed Miller for her awesome artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. And thank you to Erica Corbin for the use of her song Round the Globe. You can listen to Erica's music wherever music is sold or streamed.
Emma, it was great having you on this week. Thank you so much for sharing about your New York life.
Thank you, friends.
Yay.
That's going to do it for this week. So until next time, remember to take me with you.
Take me with you.
Take me with you.
Woo!
Can we get a sailboat chasing down the sunset as we float round and round the globe? Salty air and balmy nights, guided only by the lights above, and a little love. Oh, the world is out there waiting to